Lightning split the sky above Manhattan as thunder rattled the glass walls of Victoria Monroe's private boardroom. The assistants had cleared out, leaving her alone with a single object on the glossy mahogany table, an ivory envelope sealed in dripping gold leaf. With a single deliberate inhale, she slid the seal, ripped open the flap, and let the paper fall like the countdown to a warhead's detonation. Ink shimmered under the fluorescent glare. "You're invited to Maxwell Langston's wedding." A smirk curved her lips, but her heart thundered. Tonight the invitation would not be a courtesy. It was a challenge, a gauntlet thrown at her feet. Victoria's double take out the floor-to-ceiling window revealed rain-slicked streets flickering with neon agony. She crumpled the paper, then smoothed it flat, voice low, steel-edged with purpose. "This ends on my terms." Her pulse thrummed like a war drum underneath her silk blouse, and she whispered, "Find me someone who can shatter expectations." Sound gripping. If you're on Victoria's side or rooting for the underdog. Dad, drop a comment below. Hit subscribe and tap the bell. This saga only grows more explosive from here. At 5:47 a.m., the alarm in Ben Harper's Brooklyn apartment sputtered to life, dragging him out of a restless dream. In the narrow kitchen, he flipped on a single bare bulb cold light, bouncing off scratched linoleum as he measured formula for his daughter's morning bottle. Outside, the city exhaled a low rumble of subway cars slipping past, and distant sirens stitching dawn to its soundtrack. In the reflection of the chipped ceramic mug, Ben rubbed 3 days' stubble from his jaw and squared his shoulders. Today, like every day, he balanced two worlds. The one where he was, Dad first breadwinner, second, and the one he once thought would last: boardrooms, business pitches, promises now burned to ash. But his focus snapped back to his daughter Ava when she stirred in the cracked pack crib. Swaddled in a pastel blanket clouded with faded stars, her lashes fluttered open, revealing blue eyes shining with unspent trust. Ben crouched down, voice soft as dawn, murmuring, "Hey kiddo, ready for school?" She offered a shy smile through sleep, and he lifted her onto his knee bottle, poised like an olive branch to the world. One slow sip, and Ava's restless stir turned to contented sighs. Ben's heart clenched and eased in the same breath. Caring for her was easy, providing for her almost impossible. An hour later, balancing a lightweight backpack and Ava's tiny hand in his own, Ben weaved through Manhattan traffic en route to his water delivery route at the Monroe Tower. Half-empty crates rattled against the steel dolly, each thump a reminder of past splurges. Cell phone repairs, rent overdue, therapist appointments to soothe tension that never quite loosened its grip. If he could just get the premium spring water to the high-rise offices on time, he could avoid the late fees that meant another sleepless night. He glanced at the sleek tower's mirrored facade rising into low-slung clouds, a monument to wealth he had once felt part of. At precisely 7:02 a.m., Victoria Monroe surveyed her kingdom from behind bulletproof glass. 3 widescreens flickered with global stock trends, oil futures, and an incoming dossier on a rival acquisition. She sipped black coffee, no cream, no sugar, a ritual that reminded her weakness was a choice. Below her polished nails, the obsidian desk gleamed. A framed photo of her late mother smiled in bronze relief, a reminder that her legacy stretched beyond any quarterly report. Her assistant Marcus slipped into the suite like a shadow. "Ms. Monroe," he said, voice cautious. An envelope arrived, secured and unmarked. Victoria glanced at him, then at the sealed parcel on the glass tabletop. She rose every inch of the force of nature in a designer sheath gown and crossed the room. Rain pelted the windows, blurring the city's edge into watercolor drips as she unfurled her fingers to lift the envelope. The moment froze, raindrops paused mid-fall, the hum of the city dimmed to watch her break the seal. Gold dust from the embossing clung to her palm. Victoria slid out the cream cardstock beneath eyes, narrowing as she read the elegant script. "Victoria Monroe is cordially invited to the marriage of Maxwell Langston and Malene Hawthorne." She let the invitation flutter back to the table, where it lay like a sharpened blade. Memory sparked Maxwell's easy charm. The afternoon their engagement collapsed the courtroom hearing that followed. The world had labeled her cold, too driven, too untouchable. Maxwell had traded loyalty for a family name as if her heart were collateral damage. But this envelope wasn't mere formality. It was a spotlight trained on her pain. She inhaled, and the storm outside answered in thunder. Suppressing the urge to toss the paper into the rain, she gathered it, the creases whispering defiance. "He wants me there to show I've cracked," she murmured to the empty room. Marcus watched her reflection tighten, every calculated step exuding command. "No," she said, voice low and composed. "He'll watch me rise." Fingers tapped the mahogany, forging a new rhythm. "Make it clear I won't crumble." Marcus nodded, already reaching for his phone. On the skyline, the rain resumed its rush-sliding water streak lines across the glass. Victoria Monroe slipped the invitation into a leather portfolio, then straightened her posture as though the weight of the challenge had only sharpened her edge. A war chamber, not a wedding guest list, lay ahead, and she intended to emerge unbroken. By mid-morning, the news feeds below were alive with speculation. Monroe to attend ex's nuptials, power move, or emotional trap. Unfazed. Victoria tapped her phone. "Begin the search," she instructed Marcus. "I need someone unignorable, someone who can shatter every expectation." He swiped through profiles instantly. Actors, CEOs, retired champions. She shook her head once. "Not a face he'll predict," she added, voice trembling only with excitement. "Find me the storm!" Across town, Ben Harper wheeled his dolly into the marble lobby of Monroe Tower, unaware he was the answer to that whispered command. As the first crate touched down, his gloved fingers brushed the brass elevator button, and the gears of fate ground into motion. Neither father nor CEO could yet see how a single night, a simple invitation, and a borrowed umbrella would redraw the lines between power and vulnerability and leave the world waiting for a reckoning. Thus the spark was lit, an invitation cloaked in insult, a vow unspoken, and the silent promise that when rain met city lights, every expectation would be washed away and a new story would begin. In her glass-walled office, Victoria's assistant watched the skyline tremble under a storm. "Will you crumble?" he asked. She turned voice low and steel cold. "No. I'll make him regret ever underestimating me." 3 days later, she slipped on stilettos and set her plan in motion. Thunder rattled the windows as Victoria Monroe settled behind her crystalline desk. The invitation lay open before her like a dare she couldn't resist. Outside, rain carved rivulets down the glass, each drop echoing the pulse in her temples. She picked up her phone and dialed tone clipped but brimming with intent. "Secure every channel of Monroe Tower's scheduling software," she instructed. "I want to reroute a delivery." Marcus, her chief of staff, blinked. "A delivery?" She didn't look up. "Premium spring water, the kind our clients pay a premium to skip the line for." She tapped the invitation's edge with a manicured nail. "I need someone to deliver it personally. Make it seem accidental, but ensure it's him." He nodded, adrenaline and wonder flickering in his eyes. Victoria hung up, then rose and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the city in a brutal white wash. In that moment, she saw the plan in its entirety: humiliation for Maxwell, an unforgettable spectacle, and her own vindication framed by his stunned face. She breathed in the charged air, steadying the storm within her. That night, she lay awake on a mattress that felt as cold as marble. Her mind replayed every slight Maxwell had dealt, each calculated smile in boardrooms, every public whisper questioning her strength. She pictured his smug satisfaction when she declined his last outreach, and then the invitation artfully cruel landing like a gauntlet at her feet. Sleep fled before the shape of her retaliation, a man who needed no script, no crutch, whose mere presence would crack Maxwell's polished world. Meanwhile, 3 boroughs away, Ben Harper folded laundry in his cramped bedroom. The whir of the washing machine blended with the distant hum of traffic. When he checked the water delivery route online, his heart sank. There was no condo address for Everhart Tower. He rubbed the sleep from his eyes, shrugged into a wrinkled shirt, and kissed Ava's forehead before she stirred. Whatever change was coming, he resolved it could wait until after he'd tucked her in again. Back at Monroe HQ, a small team assembled in a covert war room. Screens flashed with live feeds of building manifests, GPS trackers, and internal calendars. A data specialist keyed in Ben's name, former VP at Beacon Grid, now off the grid entirely. No LinkedIn profile, no public records beyond a delivery license. Perfect. Victoria watched the lines of code blur under her gaze, finding him had been easier than she'd anticipated. "They'll think it's a new executive perk," she said as Marcus arranged the final details. "A concierge-style delivery, the kind of surprise and delight that goes viral." Her lips curved. "Only he won't know he's part of a spectacle until he's standing beside me." In the half-lit morning hours, Monroe Tower's internal system blinked with a sudden alert route adjustment required. The next available delivery slot, Ben's, was instantly rerouted to the 15th floor private lobby. A notification pinged his app. He frowned at the address change and tapped to accept. The fee was high, but sometimes opportunity looked like money. Victoria returned to her office at dawn, slipped off her stilettos, and stretched in silence. She allowed herself a moment of calm. The storm outside had passed, leaving the city damp and gleaming. She picked up the invitation once more, tracing the embossed letters with her fingertip, and recited Maxwell's name like a promise. When Ben wheeled his dolly into the marble lobby 3 days later, the polished floors echoed beneath his boots. He paused, scanning the pristine walls etched with Everhart Holdings. The sky outside was a hard blue. The rain long gone, but the air carried a chill that seeped through the double doors. He straightened his grip on the dolly's handle and stepped forward. Victoria watched from her office's glass perch as the elevator doors opened. She saw him pause, the curve of his shoulders, the set of his jaw. For an instant, she felt something unguarded stir within her, a flicker of recognition, as though she'd glimpsed a version of herself when she'd first climbed these corporate stairs. Then she closed her mouth, reminding herself why she'd orchestrated this moment. He carried the final crate through the lobby. Shoulders steady, eyes trained on the next corner. When he rounded the marble column, she stood up, slipping back into her stilettos. The click of her heels on the polished floor sounded like a countdown. She met him halfway, expression neutral as a stone mask. "Mr. Harper?" she asked, voice even. He blinked surprise, flitting across his face. "I'm Victoria Monroe," she continued, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming." His gloved hand paused above hers. He glanced at the crate, then back at her. "You must have meant to schedule, someone else." There was no arrogance in his tone, only curiosity. She let her fingers close around his palm, firm and deliberate. "I scheduled exactly you." Her eyes held his. "I'd like to compensate you for one evening, no lines, no charades, just your presence." He squared his shoulders, lowering the crate. Behind him, a small pair of boots scuffed across the marble, Ava peeking out from behind his leg. Victoria's gaze softened for an instant as the girl's wide eyes met hers. Then she cleared her throat and stepped back. "Specifically, I need you this Saturday at 6, Victoria said. "At an event where your only job is to be memorable." She dipped her head. "Let's discuss terms." Ben's gaze flicked to his daughter, then back to Victoria's unblinking stare. Somewhere between the residue of his old life and the scaffolding of his new, he perceived the gravity in her words. He knelt to adjust Ava's jacket clasp, then rose with measured calm. "I have a daughter," he said softly, "and she comes with me." The corners of Victoria's mouth lifted, the first genuine expression she'd allowed herself in 3 days. "I wouldn't have it any other way." As Marcus slipped into the room with a digital tablet, Victoria pressed her fingertips to her earlobe, recalling the thunder that rattled her bones only days before. Now the storm had settled, leaving a razor's edge of possibility in its wake. Ben reviewed the contract on the screen, 5 figures in his account. Before the ink dried with a single clause, no surprises. He scrolled to the signature line. Victoria watched him sign with a calm that belied the tremor of victory in her chest. She turned and walked back toward her window where the city sprawled beneath an early sunset. In that moment, she tasted triumph. And something else, a fragile anticipation she couldn't yet name. The final rays of daylight faded, and she slipped her stilettos back on heels, clicking with resolve. The die was cast. The game had begun, and this time she intended to win. Ben Harper balanced the wobbling stack of water crates with the precision of a tightrope walker. The 15th floor loading dock of Monroe Tower smelled of polished marble, and industry faint bleach mingled with the steam rising from the deliveries ramp below. His gloved hands gripped the handle of the dolly as if it were the only steady thing in his life, each dented crate a reminder of overdue bills and the surgery fund ticking up in his daughter's medical file. He took a breath. steadying himself against the blast of air as the freight elevator doors slid open, and that's when he saw her. Victoria Monroe emerged from the private corridor like a monarch descending for judgment. Her heels clicked against the concrete floor, a measured cadence that made the entire dock hush around her. She wore charcoal gray tailored pants and a white silk blouse, sleeves rolled to her elbows, as though she might dive into work at any moment or storm an empire. Her gaze found his instantly sharp and appraising. He blinked at the contrast, her composed power against his rumpled uniform and scuffed boots. She stopped 2 feet away, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Finally, she said, "Mr. Harper, I need a date for Saturday." He swallowed the words echoing in his mind like a riddle. A date. At a wedding for someone else? His voice came out in a croak. "Ma'am, He glanced at the crates again, half expecting a joke. "I'm here delivering water." Victoria's gaze flicked to the dolly, then back to him, lips curving the slightest smirk. "Yes, and you'll be delivering more than water," she said. "I want you at Maxwell Langston's wedding, Saturday, 6 o'clock. No lines, no speeches, no romantic pretense, just you walking beside me." She let that hang between them. "Can you do that?" His first thought was that a man had to be out of his mind to stand in front of a billionaire CEO and call that a reasonable request. His second thought was of Ava's medical bills stacking up on the kitchen counter. "Why me?" he asked, voice firmer than he felt. "There are plenty of models," she interrupted, voice neutral. "Actors, high-priced escorts, people who know exactly what to say and how to smile. I don't want someone who can fake privilege. I want someone who embodies authenticity, someone Maxwell hasn't planned for." She tilted her head. "Someone memorable." Ben's throat tightened. He'd spent the last year fighting to be seen, to not vanish in a crowd. And here was this woman offering him exactly that, yet just as quickly doubt flared. "My daughter comes with me," he said. He braced himself, imagining her terrified face at some high society event where they'd stare at her stroller. No compromise. "She stays." Victoria paused, stepping closer so the overhead light skimmed across her sharp cheekbone. For a heartbeat, her mask slipped, revealing a flicker of something raw, perhaps empathy, perhaps calculation. Then she nodded once. "Of course. Miss Harper should come too. She deserves her slice of confidence." She turned slightly, raising one hand. "But that means you'll have to be polished, proper, able to withstand scrutiny." She waved a hand toward the crate. "Finish this, Mr. Harper, then meet me downstairs in 30 minutes. We have details to discuss." He lifted the crate fingers stiff and started forward. As he rolled the dolly toward the elevator, he felt her watching. Nothing like this had ever happened to him. Never. A CEO personally recruiting him for a spectacle, never an offer that could change the tide of his life. Anxiety fluttered in his chest, but beneath it was something else, possibility. The freight elevator closed, and he guided the crates down to the lobby, the click of her heels fading behind him. In the glass panels at the entrance, he caught her reflection, a solitary figure framed by gray skies and downtown chaos. Something in her stance spoke of someone used to command even in quiet moments. He wondered what had driven her to pick him from all the people she could have chosen. By the time he returned 20 minutes later, he'd dumped half the crates in the storage room and tied off his shoelaces with trembling fingers. He stepped into the lobby by the revolving doors, straightening his back. There she was again, waiting by the concierge desk, as if she'd never left. A sleek black folder lay open in her hand. "I trust your daughter is settled," she asked, voice courteous. "She's fine," he replied, eyes sweeping the marble columns. "Can I ask what this is about? Why make such a spectacle?" Victoria glanced down at the folder, then back at him. "Because Maxwell needs to see something he didn't expect. I need him unsettled by the simplest sight, a man who needs nothing from him but respect." She handed him a stack of papers, an itinerary, a dress code for his daughter, the schedule for hair and makeup, the limo pickup times. "Everything's here. My assistant will handle the details, but you need to know the plan." He flipped through the pages, absorbing each directive: tuxedo-fitting, Friday evening rehearsal, at the estate tomorrow, at dusk, press photos at the red carpet. At the bottom, a single line caught his eye: payment transferred on acceptance. No amount specified. She'd mentioned generous compensation. His breath caught. He thought of fuel bills, rent arrears, Ava's hearing consultation. This could change everything. You really mean this, he said, voice low. Victoria nodded, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I mean every word. Are you and Mr. Harper? He looked at the folder, then at her. He could almost hear a ticking clock, the only sound in his mind, aside from Ava's laughter, echoing from a happier dream. He closed the folder with a determined click. I'm in, he said, but I want one guarantee. Her brow lifted. Name it. That after Saturday, nobody touches my daughter. No photographs in tabloids, no leaked stories. He met her gaze squarely. She's my priority. Victoria's lips curved into a genuine smile, the first he'd seen. It softened her usual steel-hard demeanor and lit her eyes with something close to relief. That's agreed. You and your daughter stay protected. Everything else is on me. He exhaled, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease for the first time in days. Where do I start? She closed the folder, stood straighter, and extended her hand. By trusting me, she said, Welcome aboard. Their hands met in a firm, decisive shake, two people from different worlds forging an alliance in that silent lobby. As he turned to leave, she called after him, voice carrying just enough warmth to reassure. One more thing, don't let the suit make you forget who you are. He paused, a half grin tugging at his lips. Trust me, I won't. Outside, the city buzzed with its usual urgency horns blaring, pedestrians weaving life surging forward. Ben felt his pulse align with that rhythm. He wheeled his dolly toward the delivery ramp and tapped the folder in his coat pocket, a talisman for the night ahead. He pictured Ava's smile when he told her about the gig, and for the first time the idea of walking into a banquet hall in a tuxedo didn't feel impossible. It felt like a lifeline. Behind him, through the lobby's glass walls, he could have sworn he saw Victoria watching a solitary silhouette against the shifting skyline poised at the intersection of power and something uncharted. She slipped back into her office, leaving the stage set for an unexpected duo, a billionaire CEO bent on vengeance and a single dad craving a second chance. In that shared glance, something unspoken passed between them, a promise that neither would ever be the same after Saturday. Ben Harper could feel the fluorescent lights above him stutter, the pale tubes flickering like hesitant sentries in the narrow service room. The air smelled of cold metal and cleaning solvents, a world away from the glittering ballrooms where he would stand by Victoria Monroe's side in 3 days. He pressed his palm flat against the cool surface of the stainless steel table between them and met her gaze steady, unblinking, as if she were a sculptor judging marble. I'll need $50,000, he said, voice low but unwavering. That covers 3 months' rent, Ava's hearing test, and a bit left over for incidentals. His eyes flicked to the contract folder she'd slid across the table, then back to her tailored silhouette. No staged kisses, no whispered scripts in the corner. I show up. I stand beside you, and I do what I'm paid to do, make an impression by being myself. She didn't flinch. Under the harsh glare of the strip lights, her ivory blouse and charcoal trousers seemed almost to glow with purpose. She nodded once slowly, as though tasting his words. A faint smile curved the corner of her mouth, a smile that carried respect. Fair, she said. Her assistant hovered by the door, arms folded, but Victoria raised a hand and he stayed rooted. 50,000 is yours on signature. You'll deliver a presence, not a performance. You'll keep your daughter close and your armor polished. And if anyone crosses the line, paparazzi socialites, even the caterer, my team will sweep them aside before you blink. Ben leaned back, wincing, as the fluorescent hum pulsed in his ears. He pictured the check clearing and Ava's smile when he told her they could finally see the specialist. He thought of the piles of overdue bills in his apartment and the fear that thumped through him every time he wondered if he'd let her down. He breathed out, finding calm in the rhythm. Confidentiality, he added. No stories, no leaked photos. If my face or hers ends up on some tabloid claiming we're a PR stunt, I walk. And you keep the money. Victoria's gaze sharpened with approval. Agreed. She gestured to Marcus, who produced a slim pen from a pocket in his blazer. He slid it across to Ben, who picked it up with careful fingers. They spread the contract on the table, precise lines of legalese etched in black ink, guaranteeing payment, specifying boundaries, outlining non-disclosure clauses and listing contingencies for any breach. The document was cold and clinical, but in that moment it felt warm with potential. Ben set the pen to the signature line. His heartbeat drummed in his wrists as he scrawled his name, Benjamin Harper. He dipped the pen in ink and signed again on the addendum guaranteeing confidentiality. Then he snapped the cap closed and placed the pen back on the table. Victoria reached out, lifting the folder with graceful ease. She tucked it under one arm and extended her free hand. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Harper." He took it, noting the firmness of her grip. In that simple contact, he felt a surge of solidarity, two people forging an unlikely partnership under the same fluorescent glare that had once served only to highlight his struggles. "Thank you," he said, voice quieter now, edged with something like humility, "for trusting me." She tilted her head, a silken curtain of dark hair brushing her shoulder. "Trust isn't given lightly," she replied, "but I believe you won't let me down." He nodded, gathering his coat and the contract folder as though they were lifelines. As he turned to leave, Marcus cleared his throat and slipped forward with a printed schedule. Ben glanced at the itinerary, a Friday evening suit fitting at Lionel and Hart, a rehearsal at dusk Saturday on the Montclair estate lawn, press positioning at precisely 5:45 p.m. "I'll be there," Ben said, sliding the schedule into his coat pocket, "and I'll do exactly what we agreed." Victoria straightened her shoulders and watched him head for the door. When he paused in the threshold, she added, voice soft but firm, "Don't let the suit make you forget who you are." Ben gave a faint smile, a rare gesture he reserved for moments of genuine connection, and stepped into the hallway. The door clicked shut behind him, and the dull throb of the fluorescents in the service room faded to silence. Outside, in the quiet hum of the tower's interior corridors, he exhaled fully, for the first time since she'd roped him into this plan. He fingered the contract folder, feeling the weight of her expectations and the promise of what lay ahead. The world outside the tower's marble walls was as chaotic as ever, horns blaring from the street below, commuters hurrying by with unwilling purpose, but for once his steps felt purposeful too. Downstairs, the press of the city washed over him, a river of urgency and noise that he navigated with new resolve. At the subway platform, he showed his MetroCard without hesitation. Each stop brought him closer to his apartment, to Ava's soft, trusting eyes. He pictured telling her, "We're going to a wedding. I'll wear a suit, and you'll be with me every step of the way." That evening, as the setting sun cast long shadows through his living room window, he gathered Ava in his arms. Her hair smelled like bedtime stories and baby shampoo. He held the contract folder open before her, turning it so she could see the signatures. "Ava, this says I get to wear special clothes and go somewhere very fancy with you," he explained, voice gentle. "It also says we can both be ourselves, no pretending. And it says we get help with things we need like rent and your hearing test." She reached out a small hand, touching the crisp paper. "Daddy wear tux?" she asked, brows furrowed in concentration. "I will," he promised, smoothing her hair. "And you'll wear something pretty, too. Do you like pink dresses?" She nodded, eyes wide. "Pink and sparkles." He laughed softly, pressing a kiss to her cheek. "Pink and sparkles it is." Later, with Ava tucked into her crib, he lay awake in the dark, tracing the contract's lines in his mind. $50,000 enough to catch up, maybe even get ahead. 50,000 reasons to walk into the grand hall of Montclair Estate and stand beside a woman who had no business trusting him. He thought of Victoria's eyes when she watched him sign, of the genuine flicker of respect that passed between them. He wondered what would happen when he stepped onto that red carpet, how the world would see him in a midnight blue tux instead of a water-stained uniform. He felt a tight knot of nerves, but deeper still was determination. Because this wasn't just a job. This was a second chance. A chance to show Ava that her father could stand tall in any room, to remind the world, and maybe himself, that worth wasn't measured by the suit you wore, but by the courage in your heart. As the city lights blinked on across Brooklyn, he rose and crossed to the window. The skyline was a constellation of ambition and possibility, each tower a promise yet to be fulfilled. He folded the contract folder, laid it on the nightstand, and switched off the lamp. Tomorrow, he whispered to the quiet room, we start something new. And for the first time in months, he fell asleep thinking not of all he lacked, but of all he might gain. Ben Harper stepped into the hushed showroom of Lionel and Hart just as the morning light caught the edges of the polished oak counters. The shop smelled of rich mahogany and fine fabric, an intoxicating blend of possibility and history. A man with silver-streaked hair greeted him with a practiced nod, his posture as precise as the cut of his bespoke suit. "Mr. Harper," he said quietly, "welcome back." Ben managed a thin smile. He'd never imagined a day when he'd return to this place not as a corporate client, but as a hired date for a billionaire's grand plan. Yet here he was, sneakers swapped for leather loafers, and a crumpled dress shirt replaced by a crisp white one pressed just minutes ago. He felt a rush of nerves like a first day of school jitter he hadn't experienced in years. The tailor, Mr. Easton, as his nameplate proclaimed, gestured toward a rack of suits. "Midnight blue," he said, running a fingertip along the lapel of one. Wool blend tensile strength woven in, a perfect balance of structure and flexibility. He lifted it from the hanger and offered it to Ben. "Try this." Ben slipped his arms into the jacket and the fabric settled around his shoulders like a second skin. He buttoned it slowly, hands trembling just enough for him to notice. The mirror at the end of the room reflected a man he once knew, a version of himself who had walked into boardrooms with certainty and erased doubt with a single nod. That man had vanished after a hostile takeover had stripped him of everything: his startup, his savings, his sense of self. Easton was crouched behind him, adjusting the jacket's shoulders with swift, sure hands. "Lean forward," he directed softly. "Relax your chest. Let the fabric drape naturally." Ben obeyed, and the tailor smoothed the wool down his back with a practiced stroke. The sensation stirred something buried deep within Ben's memory, the rush of power he'd felt when a client signed a multi-million-dollar deal, when his vision for a project had become reality. He straightened and studied the reflection. The jacket's shoulders were perfect, the waist tapered just enough to emphasize his posture. Next, Easton produced a pair of trousers, and Ben stepped into them. The tailor pinched the hem, asked him to turn this way and that, and then marked a cut line with chalk. As Easton stepped back, Ben finally exhaled. The silence in the showroom felt sacred. He could almost hear the applause he used to receive after a flawless boardroom presentation, the quiet murmur of respect that followed his every strategic pivot. He placed his palms on the counter and leaned in, examining the cut of the lapel, the subtle sheen of the fabric. "That looks sharp," he murmured, surprising himself with how much pride warmed his chest. Sharper than he'd felt in years. Easton straightened at the counter and gave him a knowing look. "You wear it like you were born for it," he said. His voice was calm, but the praise struck Ben like thundercracks of acknowledgement echoing through a long-dormant confidence. Ben's heart skipped. "You really think so?" he asked, voice quieter than he'd intended. The tailor nodded once. "Suit can empower, but power comes from within, and you have it." Ben turned to face the mirror, lifting an eyebrow at his own reflection. It was a moment of reckoning. The man who had built a company from scratch, crushed by betrayal, rising again in a suit that symbolized everything he'd lost and everything he could gain. He took in the details, the crisp collar of the shirt, the way the jacket's lapels framed his neck, the trousers' fall just above his polished loafers. Easton draped a measuring tape around Ben's neck, but Ben barely noticed. His mind was halfway to that estate garden where he'd rehearse with Victoria, halfway to the ballroom lights that would test this newfound poise. He imagined Maxwell Langston's expression when he saw him unplanned, unpolished in his power, and the surge of satisfaction that would come from knowing he'd helped Victoria rewrite the script. Easton cleared his throat, setting the tape down. "We'll make the final adjustments tomorrow afternoon. For now, let's focus on the jacket's hem." He pointed toward the sides. "Move your arms as though you're shaking someone's hand. The sleeves should allow movement without creasing at the elbow." Ben raised his arms and pretended to grasp an imaginary hand. The sleeves held firm, guiding his motion. He lowered them and watched the fabric snap back crisp as a salute. Easton nodded approvingly. "Perfect," he said. Then softer, he added, "You're ready." Ben felt a tremor of awe at the suit at himself, at the stranger who'd once been his life. He walked out of the fitting booth and clutched the lapels. "Thank you," he said to Easton. "I almost forgot how it felt to stand tall." Easton offered a small smile. "Come by tomorrow at 3. We'll put it all together. Shirt tie, pocket square. And we'll talk shoes." Ben nodded, stepping away. He inhaled the scent of wool and cedar, reluctant to leave, but driven by purpose. As he reached the shop's exit, Victoria Monroe herself appeared standing in the doorway. She wore a tailored black coat that fell to her knees, hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, heels clicking softly against the marble floor. She crossed to him, her gaze appraising as ever. Ben felt the familiar spark of nerves, but the suit, his midnight armor, held them in check. "Ben," she greeted, voice smooth. "You look transformed." He met her eyes in the mirror's reflection. "It feels that way too." She stepped closer, voice lowering so only he could hear. "Your posture, your presence, it's exactly what we need." She paused, then added, "I wasn't exaggerating when I said nobody would forget you." Ben allowed himself a small grin. "I'm glad to exceed your expectations." Victoria studied him for a long beat, as though cataloging each detail. Then she offered a genuine smile that softened the steel in her eyes. "Let's hope Maxwell feels as unsettled as we planned." He cocked his head. "That's the goal." She nodded, satisfied, and turned to leave, cloak swirling around her. "Our car will pick you up at 5 tomorrow. Be ready." He watched her go, then took one last look in the mirror. The man staring back was both familiar and new, a man reborn in wool and self-belief, ready to step into a world that had forgotten him. He straightened one last time and walked out of the showroom, the chime of the door signaling the closing of a chapter and the opening of another. Outside, the city's midday hum washed over him. He hugged the suit's gentle weight to his chest, feeling it settle like an anchor around his ribs. He pictured Ava's grin when he told her about the fitting, her eyes lighting up at the idea of her father looking so fancy. He strode down the sidewalk with purpose, each step echoing the tailor's words in his mind, "Power comes from within." And in that midnight blue wool, Ben Harper felt power rising quiet, confident, ready to claim what was once his, and to stand unwavering beside the woman who'd seen something in him that even he had forgotten existed. Ben Harper eased the latch on his apartment door and carried Ava inside the late afternoon sun, filtering through threadbare curtains to cast a golden glow over peeling wallpaper and a stack of bills teetering on the end table. The place felt smaller by the day, a single bedroom, a kitchenette that rattled when the fridge hummed, and a bathroom sink perpetually stained from hard water. Yet tonight it would be their sanctuary before everything changed. Ava was already pulling at her nightgown as soon as he set her down. Her hair tumbled in unruly waves as if she'd spent the afternoon wrestling with every pillow in the house. Ben knelt beside her on the faded rug, untying the knot at the nape of her neck to unfold the snarled strands. Each finger stroke was deliberate, a small ritual he had turned into an art form over countless evenings. "You know," he said softly, "it doesn't matter how perfect your braids look. What matters is you feel seen." She tipped her head, eyes wide, with the innocent confidence that only 6-year-olds possess. "Mama says pretty hair makes you feel pretty." He smiled, brushing a stray curl behind her ear. Mama was right. But being pretty is just the world's applause. Feeling seen, that's what really matters. He worked a bit more gently, then coaxing the final knot free. The brush slid through her hair like warm butter melting on toast. "Tomorrow night, I'll be wearing a suit," he explained, fingers pausing as he secured one tiny braid. "And you'll be by my side wearing your sparkly dress. When people look at us, we'll know we're not pretending." Her gaze drifted toward the living room window, where the sun dipped lower, painting skyscraper reflections on the tinted glass of the building across the street. "I'm not pretending," she whispered, as though testing the words. "Exactly," he said, and placed the brush on the carpet. He stood and fetched her sparkly pink dress, simple tulle with silver accents, and held it out. Ava's face lit up as though he'd produced actual fairy wings. She scampered into it, and he helped tighten the sash, feeling the soft pressure of fabric cinch her waist like a promise. Once she was properly dressed, he scooped her into his arms and carried her to the couch, tucking a worn blanket around her legs. He rummaged on the shelf for her favorite bedtime story, The Lion Who Found His Roar, and settled beside her so close that their knees touched. The muted glow of a single table lamp cast dancing shadows on the wall, turning their cramped living room into its own little theater. As he read about the lion's journey from fear to courage, Ava's head lolled against his shoulder, eyes fluttering shut at the last page's triumphant roar. He closed the book slowly and cradled her as she drifted into sleep, the steady rhythm of her breathing a balm against his own nerves. Sliding off one shoe, he eased her onto the sofa-cum-bed, smoothing the blanket over her until only her fine eyelashes peeked through. He pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Sleep well, kiddo," he whispered. "Tomorrow, you and me, we show them what it means to be unforgettable." He gathered her half-empty water glass and placed it on the coffee table, then dimmed the lamp. In the hush that remained, he touched the contract folder still on the kitchen counter, its edges crisp in the lamplight. $50,000. Enough to clear the rent pay for Ava's tests, maybe even buy a few weeks of breathing room. He traced the embossed letters of Victoria's name, wondering for the 1,000th time what he'd gotten himself into. By the time Ben crept into his bedroom, the city had surrendered to twilight, the skyline jagged against a bruised purple sky. He lay down on the thin mattress, heart still thrumming, and closed his eyes. Outside, distant sirens sang their lullaby. But in his mind, the wedding invitation spun like a glittering record, an opening note to a symphony he'd barely begun to learn. Several miles north, in a penthouse perched above Manhattan's glittering grid, Victoria Monroe practiced her entrance. The space was a cathedral to luxury marble floors cool beneath her stilettos, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city's high-rises like a constellation she could almost touch. Her reflection rippled in the glass as she walked the length of the sweet heels, clicking with a measured assurance. She paused in front of a full-length mirror, the ivory invitation folded in one slender hand. In the reflection, she saw a woman draped in black silk, elegant, sure, untouchable. But tonight, she would have company. She rehearsed sliding her arm through Ben's, the way his shoulders would square, how his gaze would find hers. She imagined the flashbulbs, the hum of whispered speculation, the way Maxwell Langston's expression would fracture when he realized this was no stunt. Her assistant Felix knocked once and stepped in with a leather-bound guest list. "Miss Monroe, the final seating chart. Media setup is confirmed. Cameras at the entrance stage right. We have 3 reporters confirmed: City Herald, Society Weekly, and The Insider." Victoria pinched the bridge of her nose as if to massage the last vestiges of doubt from behind her eyes. "Good," she murmured. No surprises. The only story Maxwell will tell is the one he doesn't see coming. She turned, slipping the invitation into her coat pocket, then smoothed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Ensure Ben's daughter has a private waiting area away from the press, with a nanny he's approved." Felix bowed. "Absolutely, ma'am." After he left, Victoria closed the drapes on the east wall and lit a single candle on the marble console, its amber flame licking at the subtle shadows she used to keep locked away. She stepped closer to the mirror and practiced the tilt of her chin, the lift of her gaze, a silent code of confidence she had mastered over countless boardroom battles. But tonight something fluttered at the edge of that confidence anticipation, a thrill she hadn't allowed herself in years. She traced the edge of her coat, imagining the hush that would fall as she and Ben entered Montclair Estate. She could see the chandeliers catching the light, the hedge-lined paths lit by lanterns, the orchestra tuning in the courtyard. She rehearsed a soft smile for the cameras, a small nod to the music, her silent declaration that she belonged in every room this time. Not as a challenger, but as a champion. Victoria inhaled deeply, letting the candle's warmth fill her lungs. She pressed her fingertips against the glass, feeling the cool pulse of the city beyond, as alive and restless as she was. Her heels carried her to the edge of the room where a leather love seat faced the skyline. She sank onto it, crossing one leg over the other, and closed her eyes for the briefest moment, gathering strength. Tomorrow night, she told herself, you walk down that aisle with purpose. Tomorrow night, his ex's wedding becomes the stage for something far greater than a matrimonial vow. It becomes the moment you reclaim every ounce of respect he denied you. Every step you take will echo in the silent spaces he left behind. A soft chime from her phone broke the reverie. A message from Marcus Blackcar arrives in 1 hour.
"Are you ready?"
Victoria opened her eyes fierce with resolve. She tapped back, "I was born ready." Then she rose, smoothing the lapels of her coat. She walked to the window just as one by one the city lights blinked on each office tower, a beacon of ambition and power. She lifted her chin and watched the city awaken under her gaze. Across the boroughs in a cramped bedroom, Ben Harper's eyes fluttered open as the first chime of his phone crackled through the darkness. A reminder set days ago. Suit fitting tomorrow at 3 Central p.m. Don't be late. He rolled onto his side, heart racing with the stirrings of impending change. Ava lay sleeping on the sofa, her chest rising and falling in rhythmic peace. He sat up slowly, propping himself on one elbow to watch her for a moment longer. The pale glow of streetlights pooled on her hair, gilding each strand with promise. He pressed a hand to his chest, feeling the echo of his own heartbeat steady in the hush before the storm. Back in her penthouse, Victoria stood alone in the darkened living room, the candle's last flicker extinguished. She unclasped a slender bracelet, the only piece of personal jewelry she owned, and slid it onto her wrist. It was simple silver, unadorned, but in its plainness it held the memory of her mother's generosity, the final gift before she passed. Victoria glanced at her reflection, the metal catching tiny points of light, and let the memory anchor her. Neither of them knew how the night would unfold, whether Ben's quiet strength would shatter Maxwell's composure the way Victoria intended, or whether the tiniest slip, a misplaced step, a trembling voice could undo everything. But in the calm that enveloped their separate worlds, they shared the same unspoken truth: a storm was coming, and they faced it together. As the city held its breath, two lives converged in preparations both tender and fierce. One father brushed tangled curls with fatherly devotion. One CEO rehearsed her grand entrance with steely precision. Both tasted anticipation on their tongues, that bittersweet tang of hope and fear entwined. And in the silent promise of what was to come, they found their strength. The limousine eased to a halt at the edge of the red carpet, its headlights flickering off the polished marble entrance of Montclair Estate. A gust of warm evening air carried the scent of magnolias and freshly lit chandeliers. Ben Harper's heart pounded in rhythm with the soft click of Victoria Monroe's heels as she opened the door first. The flashbulbs ignited like a summer storm, each burst of light illuminating her black silk gown as if it were forged from liquid night. Victoria stepped out with a calm precision that belied the roar of cameras and murmurs of the assembled press. Her gown hugged her shoulders and tapered to the ground, moving with her like a living shadow. She paused at the top of the carpet's gentle slope, lifting her chin so her profile caught that fleeting blaze of light just right. A hush descended the way water stills before it reaches the shore. Behind her, Ben unclasped the limo door and rose into view. The midnight blue tux, tailored to his frame in Lionel and Hart's hushed showroom, caught glints of flash like a dark mirror. For a heartbeat, he hesitated, only to find Victoria's steady gaze beckoning him forward. He stepped out, shoulders squared, and the crowd shifted. No longer a delivery man scuttling through back corridors, he was the quiet storm Victoria had summoned. A cascade of shutters went off the air, scented with anticipation. Ben's breath caught as he scanned faces clustered behind velvet ropes, socialites in shimmering gowns, hedge fund magnates in Pierre Cardin, and the ever-present files of paparazzi wielding lenses that swallowed souls for breakfast. Somewhere in that swirl stood Maxwell Langston, her ex-fiancé, and Malene Hawthorne, the woman who had once clasped Victoria's place. "Stay close," Victoria whispered, her voice a silk thread stitched between the roaring flashes. Her fingers brushed his arm, an echo of the small, intimate gestures that had opened them both to something unexpected. Ben nodded, chin lifting to catch her eye. In that moment, they shared a silent oath, no flinching, no faltering. They moved together, the red carpet's velvet greeting soft under Ben's polished loafers. Each step was a line of code written in confidence. Tonight, they would rewrite the narrative. The crowd parted, instinctively drawn by the contrast of her ebony elegance and his unspoken strength. Maxwell's gaze snapped to them first. He stood beneath the grand archway, arm draped possessively around Malene's waist, his suit pristine, his smile practiced. But when the flashbulbs danced across Victoria's gown and the silhouette of Ben's quiet power, his composure cracked. His mouth curved into an uncertain question, "Who is that man?" And his eyes flicked from Victoria to Ben, searching for an answer. Victoria offered no explanation. Instead, she raised her shoulders, letting the fabric of her gown fall like a curtain of midnight behind her. Ben kept pace, starlight reflected in the sharp crease of his trousers. They reached Maxwell's side, and Victoria extended her hand, an invitation and a challenge. "Good evening, Maxwell," she said, voice cool enough to still the flurry of paparazzi flashes. "Thank you for having us." His jaw clenched, and Malene's painted smile trembled as she watched Ben's steady form. The tabloids had rehearsed every angle how Victoria would crumble, how she might beg forgiveness or slink away. Instead, here she was radiant and resolute, flanked by a man who had nothing to gain except the dignity she had restored to him. Ben nodded politely, offering a firm handshake that spoke of respect, not rivalry. The camera zoomed in on that moment, the billionaire CEO and her delivery man date, a tableau no scriptwriter could have devised. A collective breath seemed to catch in the crowd's throat. As they advanced, the whispers began, "Is that him? She really chose the delivery guy? Look how he carries himself." Those murmurs trailed behind them like ghostly applause. Victoria and Ben glided past clusters of well-to-do guests who stared with open mouths and parted like the sea before a storm. They reached the reception hall's threshold, where a wall of crystal chandeliers spilled liquid light across white marble floors. A hush fell again this time, not from anticipation, but from awe. Ben's reflection shimmered against the glossed surface, his posture upright, his presence undeniable. Just moments ago, he had been a ghost in his own life. Now he was the lead in a scene so charged it crackled in the air. Inside the orchestra paused mid-note brass instruments, held poised like sentinels. Victoria and Ben moved toward the head table where Maxwell and Malene sat, Maxwell's hand white-knuckled around his champagne glass. He forced a smile as they approached, but his eyes were unmasked raw with shock. Victoria turned to him once more, her voice softer now, but no less powerful. "I hope you enjoy the evening," she said, and the words slipped across the room like a silk knife. Then she offered her arm to Ben. "Shall we?" Ben lifted her hand to his lips in a courteous gesture that rippled through the crowd, stirring a cocktail of envy and admiration. He helped her descend a few steps to the head table where she seated herself deliberately on a gold-accented chair. The empty place beside her waited like a promise. Ben offered her a slight nod, then took his own seat, his eyes never leaving hers. Maxwell cleared his throat, the brittle sound echoing in the sudden quiet. "Victoria," he began, voice brittle, "you look stunning." She tipped her chin, cool confidence rippling through her gaze. "Thank you. I trust the evening will be equally memorable." He swallowed, and Malene's forced smile wavered as she realized she shared space with a man she'd never imagined competing with. Ben folded his hands in his lap, watching Maxwell with the serene calm of someone who carries his own worth, unshaken by others' expectations. The orchestra resumed its waltz, and servers drifted through the crowd with trays of champagne. Cameras still popped at the perimeter, capturing every tableau Victoria's serene victory. Ben's dignified bearing, Maxwell's tremulous composure. The gallery of onlookers murmured and clicked while Victoria leaned toward Ben, her breath a warm whisper. "You're doing beautifully," she said, and her smile was the faintest curve of dawn-breaking night. He met her eyes, a quiet gratitude shining there. "So are you." The first strains of a violin solo unfolded, and two waiters crossed to present them with flutes of sparkling wine. Ben lifted his glass in a gesture of solidarity, and Victoria tapped the rim gently, glass ringing like a single clear note in the symphony of flashbulbs. They sipped, letting the effervescence kindle a shared warmth. Around them, the reception resumed its rhythm, guests leaning close to murmur assumptions, cameras pivoting to capture every gesture, the orchestra weaving a tapestry of strings and brass. But for Victoria and Ben, the world condensed to the space between them, the breath of silk against wool, the shared heartbeat of triumph and possibility. In that charged hush across the head table's polished surface, Maxwell realized the night had slipped from his control. The woman he had tried to cast aside had returned not as a fragile ghost, but as an unshakable force, and at her side stood not an actor reading from a script, but a man whose quiet strength outshone every chandelier in the room. Victoria caught Maxwell's eye one last time and offered a small, graceful nod, the kind that marked both an end and a beginning. Then she turned back to Ben, her eyes reflecting candlelight, and said softly but with perfect clarity, "Thank you for reminding me who I am." Ben inclined his head, a gentleman's acknowledgement that spoke louder than any spotlight. In that gilded hall, amidst the swirl of gowns and polished cufflinks, they had arrived not as a scandal, but as a revelation proof that true power lies not in pedigree, but in presence. And as the violin solo rose to its final crescendo, the grand entrance that had shattered every expectation settled into memory, leaving an afterglow that would linger long after the last flashbulb dimmed. Ben Harper guided Victoria Monroe through the warm glow of the reception hall, where crystal chandeliers dripped light like frozen waterfalls. The murmur of high society small talk swirled around them, board chairmen extolling quarter returns, hedge fund wolves praising each other's pedigree socialites, flitting from table to canapé tray in search of the next best angle. Normally, a man in Ben's position would have shuffled along the fringes. Tonight, he moved through the room with a surgical calm that unsettled every practiced power play. A distinguished gentleman in a charcoal pinstripe suit leaned in as they passed. "Miss Monroe," he purred, "I didn't recognize your companion. He's distinguished." He paused as though weighing his words between aristocracy and curiosity. "What is his background?" Victoria offered a gracious smile, but Ben answered before she could. "I was once in finance," he said, voice steady. "Ran a small tech firm, then I stepped away." The gentleman blinked at the reference, shifting his gaze from Victoria's polished composure to Ben's unassuming dignity. Now Ben continued, "I'm focused on more important things." The chairman's brow furrowed, his lips pressed into a thin line. A departure from the usual, he murmured, but the edge of envy in his tone was unmistakable. Ben merely inclined his head as if acknowledging a fact that needed no defense and continued onward. Across the ballroom, a board director from Everhart Holdings intercepted them, glass of champagne poised like a sword. "Victoria, darling, you simply must introduce me to this fascinating man," she said, voice heavy with expectation. "He's hardly the sort you parade around social events." Victoria met her gaze evenly. "Allow me," she said, and introduced them. The director's eyes flitted over Ben's tuxedo, then rested on his calm expression. "Your daughter must be very proud," Ben said, extending his hand. The director coughed, nearly dropping her flute. "Proud, of course," she stammered, imagining headlines that read, "Monroe's secret weapon, the janitor who stole her heart." Ben gave a small nod and moved on, leaving her flushed with startled admiration. They turned down a side corridor lit by mirrored sconces. Soft laughter trailed behind them, women in couture comparing their seats, at the head table men speculating on follow-on deals. Ben scanned the crowd, noting the way people parted as if the night's true drama lay not with the bride and groom, but with the duo who just usurped their scene. He caught Victoria's eye, her lips curved in a fleeting smile of surprise and approval. He offered his arm. "May I tempt you with a quieter corner?" She glanced toward the grand piano tucked beneath a balcony of gilded railings. The pianist's fingers danced in arabesques across ivory keys, weaving a melody both tender and unbound. She slipped her arm through his. "Lead the way." They paused beside the piano as the piece reached a lilting crescendo. Ben's reflection shimmered in the lacquered surface, sleeves draping just so, tie knot perfect. He turned to Victoria, their faces close enough to share breath, but distant enough to keep the world at bay. "Dance with me," he asked quietly, extending a hand. Her chest rose and fell in a controlled breath. "I haven't danced in years," she admitted, voice soft with vulnerability. "Not outside a boardroom gala where every step is judged," he offered a gentle smile. "Then let tonight be unjudged." She placed her hand in his. The pianist shifted seamlessly into a waltz as if summoned by their silent invitation. Under the chandeliers, they stepped onto a small space cleared for them, the carpet cushioning their motion. Each footfall was steady, measured, not a performance, but an honest admission that two people could find refuge in each other's arms, far from spotlight's glare. Their gaze locked as the first notes of the waltz filled the hall. Ben's hand rested lightly on Victoria's waist, his other holding her hand with the ease of someone who knew how to support without smothering. She followed his lead, her steps graceful yet infused with something raw and beautiful, a willingness to trust again. Around them, the ballroom continued its orbit, couples clustered at tables, waiters gliding between groups, the soft clink of crystal. But in that circle under the piano's spotlight, time slowed. Victoria's breath caught when Ben guided her into a gentle turn. His eyes never left hers, as though he read the unspoken script of every fracture that had led them here, her shattered trust, his quiet resurgence. He hummed along with the melody, a low reassurance. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting his presence anchor her. The world's demands faded. No analyst dissecting her market moves, no socialites whispering about her private life. There was only the music, the rhythm, and the two of them moving as one. The chorus of strings swelled, and Ben dipped her in a classic flourish. For a heartbeat, she felt weightless, an executive without walls, a CEO without armor, simply a woman reacquainted with the language of grace. When he raised her back up, her hair brushed against the collar of his tuxedo, and his eyes warmed with a rare gentleness. "You move beautifully," he whispered, as much to her soul as to her form. She opened her eyes, a faint laugh trembling at the corner of her lips. "Not half as beautifully as you," she replied, voice brimming with sincerity. "You've made this feel simple." He guided her in a smooth pivot. "Sometimes simplicity is the hardest thing we forget." The waltz drew to its final notes, but neither loosened their hold. The pianist's last chord lingered, a floating question in the air. As the applause rippled through the hall, some curious, some admiring. All transfixed, Ben led Victoria back toward the head table. Maxwell watched from his seat, jaw slack with disbelief. He had expected a spectacle of sorrow or contrition. Instead, he'd witnessed two souls reclaiming their narrative in a display too genuine to script. Malene, perched at his side, looked at him with a newfound disdain. This wasn't the power play they'd anticipated, but a reclamation of dignity that no alliance or inheritance could mimic. Victoria and Ben slipped into their chairs, the final embers of the dance still glowing between them. Victoria's hand brushed against his as she settled a silent thank you for the moment of truth they'd shared. He offered her a subtle nod, meeting her gaze with unwavering loyalty. The orchestra transitioned to light chatter and the clinking of silverware, but the undercurrent had shifted. Where once guests had wondered if Victoria would crack, they now questioned their own assumptions about power and presence. Ben's quiet strength had disrupted the evening's carefully choreographed politics, and his dance with Victoria had forged an intimacy that no whispered rumor or camera flash could breach. As the next course was served, Victoria leaned toward Ben, her voice a murmur meant just for him. "Thank you," she said, fingertips brushing his, "for reminding me why vulnerability can be our greatest strength." He reached for his glass, lifting it in a toast that felt like a vow. "To truth," he said, "and to the moments that reveal it." Their glasses clinked softly, a quiet note amid the evening's orchestrated grandeur. Around them, the guests resumed their conversations, but for Victoria and Ben, the waltz's echo remained a wordless truth shared in a room built on performances. And in that lingering silence between notes, they found a harmony all their own. After the last toast, Victoria and Ben slipped away from the grand hall, threading through guests still clustered around candlelit tables. The cool night air hit them as they stepped into the waiting car. No flashbulbs, no whispered critiques, just the hum of the engine and the city lights blurring past the tinted windows. Ben watched Victoria's reflection in the glass, her profile framed by the glow of passing street lamps. For the first time, she looked vulnerable rather than invincible. They arrived at her penthouse in near silence. The elevator doors opened to reveal art-lined walls and plush carpeting leading to floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Manhattan's sleepless streets. Victoria unlocked the door with a swipe of her keycard. Inside, the apartment felt more like a sanctuary than the fortress he'd imagined. A single lamp cast a warm pool of light on a low coffee table, and on the far wall, the city's skyline shone like a constellation she seemed to hold in her hands. "Make yourself at home," she said, shrugging off her coat and letting it fall across a velvet chaise. "I'll get us something to drink." Her heels clicked as she crossed to the bar, where rows of crystal glasses and decanters sparkled under recessed lighting. Ben closed the door quietly behind him. He hung his jacket on a brass hook, then took in the space-soft rugs underfoot, a thick throw draped over the sofa, family photographs discreetly placed among abstract sculptures. It wasn't ostentatious. It was curated, thoughtful, a reflection of a woman who controlled everything except her own loneliness. She poured 2 glasses of amber liquid whiskey neat and handed one to him. "I hope that's okay," she said as he settled onto the edge of the sofa. "I know you're not a drinker in suits." He shook his head, accepting the glass. The warmth of the whiskey seeped through his palms. "It's fine," he replied. "Thank you." They sank into companionable silence, the only sound the traffic far below, and the soft exhale of the air conditioner. Victoria toyed with her glass, tracing the rim with her fingertip. Finally, she spoke. I've stood in boardrooms and courtrooms in front of cameras, and never once did I feel seen, she said, voice low. People respect what I build, what I control, but they don't see the woman behind the titles. She lifted her eyes to the window where distant headlights looked like drifting fireflies. When my father died, I thought I'd find purpose in running Everhart Holdings. Instead, I inherited his ghosts. I learned to mask every doubt, every ache. It became easier to be the storm than to reveal the calm. Ben listened, swirling his whiskey as if it held answers. He realized this was her confession, the one she never allowed in the glare of public expectation. Victoria Monroe, untouchable CEO, was admitting the price of her empire isolation. He set his glass on the coffee table and leaned forward. I know what that feels like, he said. I lost everything once, too. Her head snapped toward him, surprise softening her features. He exhaled slowly, gathering the memory. 5 years ago, I had a startup Beacon Grid. I poured every ounce of myself into it. Then my partner sold me out. Took the buyout, left me with nothing. My savings, my home, even my marriage, it all vanished. And just like that, I was a ghost in my own life. Her breath caught. She listened as he unfolded the story, how the holding company tied to his ex-partner had buried him, how he'd watched the court strip away his ownership, how he'd fought to keep custody of Ava but lost her for months. Each sentence was a stepping stone over the rubble of betrayal. I remember the void, he continued, voice thick with recollection. Waking up in that empty apartment and thinking I'd never find solid ground again. But then Ava, she became my purpose. She taught me that even when your world is in pieces, someone's eyes can give you reason to rebuild. Victoria's hand trembled slightly as she touched his wrist. I'm sorry, she whispered, and he could feel the weight of her empathy through her silk blouse. I never knew. He shook his head. It's not your fault. He paused, studying her face in the lamplight. Neither is your loneliness. We both survived by hiding our wounds. Only tonight did I see yours. She set her glass down and rose, moving to the window. The city stretched beneath her, a tapestry of lights and hopes. I thought power would fill the hollow, she confessed. But it's a poor salve for a broken heart. I've negotiated every deal, but I've never sold my own soul. That stays hidden even from me sometimes. Ben joined her at the glass, and they stood side by side in the hush. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. You're more than your title, he said firmly. You deserve to be seen for all of you, strength and vulnerability, and you don't have to face it alone anymore. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. I want that, she admitted, voice breaking. She turned, meeting his gaze with raw honesty. I want someone who knows my scars and stays. Ben's heart clenched. Without hesitating, he took her hand and guided her back to the sofa. They sat close, shoulders touching, the earlier tension dissolving into something warm and urgent. In the soft lamplight, their faces were inches apart. I was afraid to trust again, she said, voice trembling. Afraid that every alliance was another betrayal in disguise. He cupped her face, thumb brushing the tear. She blinked away. Trust is a risk, he replied. But some things are worth the fall. Her lips quivered into a small smile. I don't want to be afraid anymore. He leaned in, forehead resting against hers. The whiskey burned at the back of his throat, but his next words were gentler than any liquor. You won't be. They stayed like that for a long moment, two survivors speaking the same wounded language in perfect unison. Outside, the city pulsed and hummed, oblivious to the quiet reckoning taking place in a high-rise above. Inside, time felt suspended, as if the confessions they'd shared had rewound the clock to a point before pride and fear shaped their lives. Victoria rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Thank you, she murmured, for reminding me I can still feel. Ben pressed a kiss to her temple. Thank you, he whispered back, for letting me see you. The hush deepened as the clock in the hallway chimed midnight. They sat in companionable silence, hands entwined, no longer two strangers bound by a scheme, but two souls laid bare by honesty. Neither needed to speak again. In the shared quiet, they discovered the truth that vulnerability could be the strongest bond, and that survivors, when seen, could choose to heal together. Morning broke with the shriek of notifications on Ben's phone. He blinked at the glare of the screen and scrolled through half-awake headlines. Single dad's royal date sparks custody clash. CEO's delivery driver. Beau under fire. Ava's daddy in the spotlight. Custody battle looms. His stomach knotted. For weeks he'd worried about tabloids digging into his life, but he never imagined Victoria's boardroom gambit would unleash this firestorm. He tapped the screen, swiping through link after link comments questioning his motives. Speculation that Victoria had arranged a custody ambush, rumors that the evening spectacle was nothing more than manipulation. Across town, Victoria Monroe woke to the same digital uproar. From the penthouse's floor-to-ceiling windows, she could hear the distant rumble of traffic sliding through her carefully curated world, an echo of the chaos now spilling into her inbox. She switched on her tablet and scanned the avalanche of articles, each more sensational than the last. Her board members, she knew, would already be calling their voices tight with concern. The carefully laid plans to expose Maxwell's arrogance had delivered the knockout blow, but collateral damage was never far from such campaigns. By mid-morning, her private elevator hummed downward. She stepped into the lobby with deliberate poise, every inch the unshakable CEO, but the knot at her chest spoke of the storm inside. Marcus, her chief of staff, intercepted her with a stack of classified media reports. "Ma'am, the board is convening at 11, he said quietly. "They're asking for an explanation and fast." Victoria nodded, her gaze drifting across the marble floors in glinting gold accents. "Thank you," she replied. "I'll be there." Marcus hesitated, concern flickering in his eyes. "Shall I prepare a statement?" she asked. He shook his head. "They want you in person." She straightened her spine. "Then let's give them what they need." The mahogany doors to the executive boardroom slid open on time, revealing a semicircle of leather chairs occupied by Everhart Holdings' most senior directors. Their expressions ranged from skepticism to outright panic. William Monroe, her uncle emeritus board member, sat at the head tapping a stylus against a leather-bound notebook. He cleared his throat as Victoria entered. "Sloane Ear Ms. Monroe, care to explain why we're trending on every tabloid from here to London?" She closed the doors behind her and moved to the front of the table, folding her hands on the polished wood. Last night was a calculated statement. She began, voice steady. It surpassed even my expectations. Maxwell Langston's wedding was the stage upon which we demonstrated that power and presence aren't dictated by legacy. They're earned by authenticity. A murmur rippled through the room. She held up a hand. "But I realize the fallout has created concerns about our public image, and more importantly, about our governance." Her uncle's brow furrowed. "Governance. People are questioning your judgment. They're calling this a reckless move, suggesting it's blurring personal vendettas with corporate strategy." He leaned forward, voice low. "We need to mitigate the damage." Victoria met his gaze unflinchingly. "The real question," she said, "is whether we stand behind the truth or hide behind our reputations." Some directors exchanged uneasy glances. She paused, letting the silence settle like dust. "I have evidence of our company's darkest secrets. Shell companies' hidden transactions, off-book acquisitions orchestrated by my father. These deals were legal on paper but unethical in practice, executed to bury assets and manipulate markets without accountability." A gasp rippled through the boardroom. William Monroe's stylus froze. "You're talking about Cordova Partners," he said, trying to keep the tremor from his voice. "Those were legacy holdings meant for strategic acquisitions." His uncle's tone mingled confusion and defensiveness. "They were board-approved." Victoria shook her head. "Only on paper. We never disclosed them to our shareholders. We never vetted them through our compliance channels. They operated entirely outside Everhart's governance structure, and my father used them to purchase companies knowing full well they would harm the very employees we claimed to serve." She reached into her portfolio and laid out a thick dossier. "Here are the acquisition records for Beacon Grid, Sunrise Pharmaceuticals, and 3 other companies. My father used Cordova Partners to orchestrate those deals, then scrubbed the trail. The result was legal extraction of assets and mass layoffs. Photocopied contracts, audit logs, and emails littered the table like evidence at a trial. The board members exchanged looks of horror. "Why now?" William Monroe demanded. "Why bring this up when we're already under fire for last night's spectacle?" Victoria lifted her chin, steel in her tone. Because we cannot continue as a company built on stolen ground. We cannot apologize for exposing Maxwell's vanity if we hide our own sins. She fixed her uncle with a steady stare. It's simple. Either we disclose these shell companies to the regulators and the public, or I resign. I will not lead a house of cards. A tense silence followed, broken only by the clicking of a pen. Then Richard Lawson, the longest-serving director, spoke. His voice was measured but carried weight. If what you're saying is accurate, this could trigger federal investigations, fine civil suits. He leaned back. It could sink Everhart. Victoria nodded. Yes. But the alternative, continued obfuscation, will destroy our integrity and brand faster than any scandal. She tapped the dossier. Truth is not a liability. Concealment is. The room held its breath. William Monroe closed his notebook slowly and slapped it shut. If the board votes to authorize full disclosure, he said, voice heavy with resignation, Everhart will weather the storm, but if any director opposes, I suggest you follow through on your resignation. Victoria allowed a small, satisfied smile. Then let us vote. One by one, the board members raised their hands for transparency, for reform, for a future built on accountability rather than legacy. When the last hand fell, the clerk announced the result unanimous in favor of disclosure and unanimous in confidence in Victoria's leadership. William Monroe stood face pale but composed and approached her. He extended his hand, a gesture of truce. You've done what I could not, he said quietly. You've taken the sword to your own lineage. She shook his hand, meeting him eye to eye. We rebuild on honesty, she replied. By lunchtime, Everhart Holdings had issued a public statement admitting the existence of Cordova Partners, detailing the shell companies and pledging full cooperation with regulators. Major news outlets hailed the CEO's courage, speculating that this marked a new era of corporate accountability. Stock analysts revised their rating, short-term turbulence, but long-term resilience under principled leadership. Back in his apartment, Ben watched the news on his laptop. The publicity around Victoria's boardroom victory eclipsed the custody rumors overnight. Headlines shifted. CEO slashes family ties to clean house. Everhart embraces radical transparency. Monroe's boardroom coup. Daughter of founder versus founder's legacy. He closed the lid and exhaled, relieved that the scandal had become a story of reform rather than personal vendettas. Meanwhile, in her penthouse, Victoria sank into her velvet chaise, a sense of relief finally washing over her. The dossiers lay on the coffee table, symbols of the reckoning she'd forced. She stared at the city skyline, still glittering, still relentless. But tonight she felt a quiet pride. She'd chosen truth over convenience, integrity over inheritance. She'd confronted the ghost that haunted her family's name and emerged stronger. Across Manhattan, two lives had collided in a whirlwind of strategy and emotion. Ben Harper had stepped into a world of power he once left behind. Victoria Monroe had embraced vulnerability to shatter the walls her father built. Now facing the fallout together, even from a distance, they had rewritten not only a wedding's narrative, but the very story of Everhart Holdings. The night shadows receded as afternoon sun flooded the penthouse. Victoria rose and walked to the windows, feeling the unfamiliar warmth of genuine confidence. She lifted her phone and typed a message to Ben Storm Weathered. Truth prevails. See you tonight. She hit send and watched the city pulse below, knowing that tonight they would meet not as CEO and contractor, but as two survivors bound by a shared commitment to authenticity and to each other. The morning sun filtered through striped awnings as Victoria Monroe, basket in hand, stepped into the farmer's market. The air was sweet with dew-washed produce and the distant scent of sizzling bacon from a nearby breakfast stand. She paused by a vendor draped in string lights where rows of jam jars gleamed like jewels. Each label, Wildberry Hill Sunrise Strawberry, promised a world of small pleasures. Her fingers brushed the cool glass of a jar and she lifted the lid to inhale the warm, fruity perfume. She smiled, feeling something inside her unfurl. Ben Harper followed close behind Ava's tiny hand tucked in his. He watched Victoria's eyes light as she set the jar against a stack of crusty sourdough slices offered by the baker next door. With a wooden spreader, she scooped a dollop of deep red jam and pressed it into the bread's soft nooks. The jam squished under the gentle blade syrup pooling at the edges. She lifted the piece to her lips and closed her eyes, savoring the burst of sweetness. Ben caught her gaze over the jam-streaked smile and felt his own heart swell. Meanwhile, Ava darted ahead, her pigtails bouncing like heartbeats. She crouched by a flower stall where a lone ladybug crawled across a daisy petal. "Daddy, look!" she chirped, reaching a chubby finger toward the tiny insect. Ben knelt beside her, lifting her onto his hip so she could watch. The ladybug unfurled its spotted wings and lifted off into the morning sky. Ava squealed in delight, sending warm ripples of laughter through Ben's chest. In that moment, surrounded by vibrant blooms and curious children, he felt life's simple magic pulse beneath their feet. A wooden cart piled high with golden pancakes beckoned them next. The vendor flipped flapjacks on a hot griddle, each one puffing steam and drifting the smell of maple into the air. Victoria placed her basket on the counter and ordered 3 stacks, 1 plain for Ava, 1 sprinkled with blueberries for herself, and 1 dusted in cinnamon sugar for Ben. He handed his daughter a small fork, watching her jab at the fluffy cake with earnest concentration. Victoria drizzled warm syrup over her pancakes, the liquid amber cascading in slow ribbons. They found a weathered picnic table under a walnut tree, its leaves whispering overhead. Ava sat between them, her pancake nearly as big as her face. Ben buttered his first flapjack, then passed the jar of strawberry jam. "Want to try it on your pancakes?" he asked. Victoria glanced at him, a playful glint in her eyes. "Why not?" she said, swirling jam through the stack until the layers gleamed pink. With their plates balanced in their laps, they shared a quiet feast, forkfuls of warm cake syrup and jam melting together in easy harmony. Victoria leaned back against the bench, wiping her lips on a napkin. "I almost forgot how good this feels," she admitted, voice soft with wonder. "Just sitting here, no agendas, no PR teams. Just us." Ben nodded, sliding a piece of pancake onto Ava's fork. "It's the best kind of therapy," he said. Between bites, he talked about the week ahead. School projects for Ava, board meetings for Victoria, and how they'd reserve these moments whenever they could. She reached for his hand across the table, their fingers lacing together like roots anchoring a sapling in soil. Later, they wandered through the stalls, selecting heirloom tomatoes still warm from the sun, fresh basil bunches, and a loaf of rosemary bread. Victoria paused at a pottery stand and ran her fingertips over a hand-thrown mug, its glaze swirling like storm clouds. She recalled how she used to rush through life, filling it with deadlines and acquisitions, never stopping to feel the cool curve of clay. Now she cradled the mug against her palm, thinking of early weekday mornings spent here with coffee instead of champagne. They returned home with baskets heavy on their arms. In the cramped kitchen, Ben laid out a patchwork quilt on the linoleum floor and set their haul on top. Vegetables, jam jars, fresh bread, and 2 pale blue mugs. Victoria unpacked a small cooler with avocado slices and goat cheese. Together they assembled an impromptu feast: jam-swirled croissants, sliced tomatoes dusted with salt, and steaming mugs of chamomile tea. Ava ran circles around them, trailing tiny handprints of jam across the quilt. Each giggle was a thread weaving them closer. Victoria poured tea into her new pottery mug, its warmth seeping through the ceramic. Ben slid next to her on the floor and they shared their small plates. He buttered a slice of rosemary bread and handed it to her. She bit in, eyes closing at the savory burst of flavor. "You spoil me," she teased, cheeks full. He smiled, brushing a crumb from her lip. "Only because you deserve it." Their laughter rang gentle in the stillness, a melody that belonged solely to them. Ava returned, clutching a scrap of paper she'd found in her dad's pocket. "Look!" she announced, holding up a crayon drawing of Mom, Dad, and herself, all smiling under a sun. Victoria's chest tightened. This little picture scribbled in Ava's energetic hand captured everything they longed for. She scooped Ava onto her lap, smoothing the drawing over her shoulder. "It's perfect," she whispered, kissing her daughter's head. Ben watched the scene, the small family huddled on the quilt, and felt a profound calm settle in his bones. As the market's bustle dwindled into midday lull, they lingered over tea and bread, savoring each other's company. Victoria, who once believed healing came through grand gestures, now understood it thrived in these unguarded smiles and jam-fingered hands. Ben, whose heart had been guarded against disappointment, recognized the trust he'd found in her gaze. Each shared bite, each passing moment of laughter wove them closer into a rhythm neither had known they needed. Sunlight shifted through the window, painting the quilt in soft gold. Ava yawned, head heavy from the morning's excitement. Victoria lifted her against her shoulder, humming a lullaby Ava hadn't heard in weeks. Ben rose to grab a cozy blanket, draping it over the three of them. The quilt and the blanket became their world, a nest where healing blossomed without fanfare. Victoria pressed a gentle kiss to Ben's cheek as they sat together. "Thank you for today," she said, voice thick with emotion. "For making me slow down." He wrapped an arm around her and rested his head against hers. "Thank you," he replied, "for letting me in." They remained like that for a long moment, the kitchen's quiet cocoon shielding them from the past's echoes and tomorrow's demands. Outside the city thrummed with life, but inside they had discovered a different pulse, one measured in the sweetness of strawberry jam and the laughter of a little girl chasing ladybugs. In the heart of their humble home, they built a new rhythm stitched from Sunday mornings and simple joys. And in the gentle hush that followed, they realized that healing didn't roar. It whispered softly in the small moments they chose to share. The door to the rooftop swung open on its creaking hinges, and a rush of chilly night air swept over them. String lights. Victoria's handiwork draped overhead like scattered stars, their bulbs glowing soft gold against the inky sky. The city below was a lattice of lights and distant traffic hum. But up here, wrapped in wool and warmth, the noise seemed miles away. Ben pulled his coat tighter around him and watched as Victoria set down a tin teapot beside three mismatched mugs, each one an unspoken testament to the household they'd become. Ava sat between them on a thick blanket, knees tucked under her chin. She hugged a stuffed rabbit that had seen better days, its fur matted but beloved. Ben reached over and ruffled her hair, sending her giggling as the rabbit nearly tumbled from her lap. "Your turn to choose," he whispered, nodding toward the pots of chamomile tea. Victoria smiled and eased herself onto the blanket, crossing her legs. She poured tea into Ava's smallest mug first, then Ben's, then her own steam spiraling upward in glowing tendrils. Ava's face lit up when she blew on her mug. "It's not too hot," she said, sipping carefully. She paused, eyes wide as if struck by some sudden thought. "When I grow up, I want a rooftop like this." She swept her arm toward the distant skyline. "With lights and tea and stars, just for me." Ben's heart tightened. He exchanged a look with Victoria, proud and soft all at once. "You can have anything you want, kiddo," he said, voice thick. "We'll build it together." Victoria wrapped her arms around both of them, pulling them closer under the blanket's generous folds. The lights overhead cast her profile in gentle relief. High cheekbones softened by candlelight eyes, luminous with something deeper than affection. "We already have it," she murmured. "Right here." They sipped their tea in companionable silence, savoring its gentle warmth. Below them, headlights drifted along avenues. Above, a sliver of moon peeked through ragged clouds. Ben rested his cheek against Ava's hair, inhaling the faint scent of chamomile and childhood dreams. Victoria's hand found his fingers curling around his thumb. "I used to think family was a fortress you built by yourselves," he said softly. Voice barely louder than the wind. Walls, defenses, perfect facades. But this feels sturdier even though it's just blankets and lights. Victoria looked at him, eyes steady. "A fortress can become a prison," she replied. "What we're building is something we choose every day, no walls required." A cool breeze rattled the lights and Ava shivered in her seat. Ben scooped her into his arms, brushing a stray curl from her forehead. "Come here, monkey," he murmured, kissing the top of her head. She nestled against his chest, eyelids drooping. The hush thickened, broken only by the soft clink of Victoria's spoon against her mug. They sat like that for a long moment, three silhouettes beneath the glow of scattered stars. No speeches, no grand declarations, just a quiet promise woven in their shared breaths. Every broken piece of their past, lost companies, custody battles, boardroom betrayals felt distant, now softened by the warmth of this new union. After a while, Ava whispered, "Tell me a dream." She looked up at Ben, eyes heavy with sleep. Victoria followed his gaze, leaning in close. "What do you dream about, kiddo?" Victoria asked. Ava yawned, then answered without hesitation. "I dream of pancake mornings in the kitchen. I dream of tea on the roof. I dream of Daddy's stories and Mommy's hands helping me paint." She blinked, fading into drowsiness. Ben kissed her forehead. "Then dream on, little star," he said. Victoria stood and scooped Ava into her arms, carrying her to a low chaise. She laid the blanket across her daughter, gently smoothing its edge. Ben watched Victoria tuck Ava's favorite rabbit beside her, then lie down himself to pull the covers over. Ava murmured something unintelligible, then settled into sleep, her tiny chest rising and falling in time with the night. When Victoria returned, Ben was already waiting, wrapping his arms around her from behind. She leaned into him, eyes closed, the soft glow of the lights dancing across her lashes. He pressed a kiss to her temple. "We should go down," he said, voice husky with emotion. She shook her head, breathing him in. "Not yet." Her fingertips trailed along his collarbone. "I want a moment more. Just us." He nodded, and they remained still silhouettes against the cold sky, wrapped in blankets and tea steam. In that liminal space between night and dawn, they shared silent confessions, hopes, unspoken fears put aside. He slid his hand to cradle her cheek. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." She tilted her head, eyes glistening in the pale light. "No," she replied. "Thank you for staying." Neither needed to speak again. Their foreheads rested together, breath mingling in the crisp air. The city pulsed beneath them, unaware of the quiet sanctuary above. They let the gentle hush wash over them, every heartbeat a vow stronger than words. Finally, Victoria exhaled a soft sound that carried both relief and resolve. She slipped one arm around Ben's waist and drew him closer. He tightened his hold as if to solidify the moment. When they did stand, it was with reluctant grace, aware that morning would bring errands and board meetings and the next chapter of their intertwined lives. But for now they lingered, savoring the heat of the chamomile mug still warm in their hands. Ben snapped the teapot lid closed and nodded toward the rooftop door. Victoria gathered the string lights, carefully letting them coil around her arms like fireflies returning to their jar. He draped the blanket around her shoulders, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. They descended the stairs side by side, footsteps silent on the metal steps, carrying Hope back into the world below. In the lobby, they paused before parting ways, Ben to their apartment, Victoria to her penthouse, but neither tugged their embrace apart. The night had woven them together in a tapestry of simple moments. Jam on toast, pancake laughter, whispered dreams, and an unspoken promise to stay. As they slipped through the separate doors into their homes, each carried the same quiet truth in their hearts, that family was not a blueprint or a contract, but the willingness to share broken pieces and build something whole. And in that gentle silence under string lights, hope had found its home.